There is a reason you were drawn to this message today. Because something was said about you when you were not there to hear it. And strangely enough, it was not about your personality. It was not about your past. It was not even about the things you have accomplished. It was about the way you present yourself. Your style. The way you walk into a room. The way you choose what to wear. The little details you may think nobody notices. The expression on your face when you are completely lost in your own thoughts. Someone noticed all of it. And that someone is connected to the person your heart has been thinking about. Your soulmate. Perhaps you have wondered whether they truly notice you the way you notice them. Perhaps you have questioned whether they remember the small things. The outfit you wore. The way your hair looked that day. The color you chose. The moment you walked past them without realizing they were watching. But there is something you may not know. Your soulmate has been paying much closer attention than you ever imagined. And what they said about your style revealed something much deeper than simple attraction. It revealed how they see you. There is a difference between someone saying, "You look good," and someone remembering exactly how you looked weeks or even months later. One is a compliment. The other is evidence that a moment stayed with them. And your soulmate remembered a moment. Maybe it happened during an ordinary day. Nothing dramatic. No grand confession. No romantic music playing in the background. Just you. Existing naturally. And somehow, that ordinary moment became unforgettable to them. They may have noticed the way you carried yourself. The confidence you showed without trying. The way your style seemed effortless. But then something changed. Because when someone asked them about you, they did not simply say that you looked attractive. They said something that exposed an emotion they had been trying to keep hidden. Something along the lines of, "There is something different about the way they present themselves." And child, that sentence matters. Because they were not only describing your appearance. They were describing the feeling you created inside them. You may not realize how powerful your presence can be. You may look in the mirror and notice the things you wish were different. You may compare yourself to people online. You may wonder whether your style is impressive enough. Beautiful enough. Memorable enough. But your soulmate was not looking at you through the same critical eyes you use on yourself. They saw something you have struggled to recognize. Authenticity. There was something about you that did not feel forced. You were not trying desperately to become someone else. And that made you stand out. But here is where this story becomes more interesting. Because your soulmate did not keep this observation to themselves. They mentioned it to someone. And the person listening noticed something in their voice. A hesitation. A softness. A change in their expression. Almost as if talking about your style accidentally brought out feelings they had been trying to control. Imagine that moment. Someone says your name. Your soulmate immediately becomes more attentive. They try to act casual. They pretend the conversation means nothing. But then they begin describing you. Not just what you wore. But how you looked wearing it. Not just your style. But the energy behind it. And then came the sentence that revealed far more than they intended. They said that you have a way of making simple things look meaningful. Think about that for a moment. Because that is not really about clothing. That is about perception. They were saying that when they look at you, they see something other people may overlook. A quiet confidence. A certain mystery. A presence that stays in their mind after you are gone. And maybe this explains something you have noticed recently. Maybe they looked at you longer than usual. Maybe they suddenly became quiet when you entered the room. Maybe they seemed nervous around you for no obvious reason. Maybe they complimented something surprisingly specific. Or perhaps they said nothing at all. But their eyes said enough. There is a reason for that. Your soulmate may have discovered that your appearance is connected to something deeper they feel about you. And that realization made them uncomfortable. Because attraction is easy to dismiss. But emotional connection? That is harder to ignore. You can tell yourself you simply like someone's appearance. You can convince yourself that you are only curious. You can even walk away. But when someone begins remembering the smallest details about you, when your image appears in their thoughts unexpectedly, when something as simple as your style becomes associated with a feeling, the situation changes. And this is where heaven wants you to pay attention. Do not assume that because they have not spoken openly, nothing is happening. Silence does not always mean absence. Sometimes silence means someone is trying to understand what they feel before they say it. And your soulmate has been thinking more than you know. There is one specific detail about your style that apparently caught their attention more than everything else. Not the thing you probably expect. Not the obvious feature. Something much smaller. Something you may have never considered important. And when they finally explained why that detail stayed in their mind, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Because what they revealed was not really about your style at all. It was about the way they feel when they look at you. And that is the part you need to hear. Because the next revelation may change the way you see their silence forever. Something was hidden inside their words. And soon, you are going to understand exactly what it was. There are moments when a person reveals the truth without realizing they are revealing it. And this was one of those moments. Your soulmate had been talking about your style, but somewhere in the middle of that conversation, the subject changed. It stopped being about what you wear. It became about how you make them feel. And they didn't seem prepared for that realization. They had probably told themselves that they were simply noticing you. Maybe they thought they were admiring your confidence. Maybe they convinced themselves that they were only curious about your appearance. But when someone remembers details that have no reason to matter, that is usually when the heart begins exposing what the mind has been trying to hide. Your soulmate remembered something very specific. A particular look. A particular outfit. Perhaps even a moment when you were not trying to impress anyone. That is what surprised them. You weren't dressed for attention. You weren't searching for approval. You were simply being yourself. And somehow, that was the moment they found hardest to forget. They described the way you looked that day. Then they paused. And someone listening to them noticed the pause. Because it wasn't an ordinary pause. It was the kind of silence that happens when a memory carries emotion. Your soulmate may have looked away. They may have smiled slightly. They may have changed the subject. But the person listening already understood. There was something there. Something deeper. And then came a question. Why do you remember that so clearly? That question caught your soulmate off guard. Because they probably didn't have a simple answer. How do you explain remembering someone's appearance long after the moment has passed? How do you explain why a certain image keeps returning to your mind? How do you explain why one person can enter a room and somehow change the atmosphere for you? You can't easily explain that. So your soulmate tried to make it sound casual. They said something like, "I just noticed." But that wasn't the whole truth. They noticed because you mattered enough to be remembered. And there is something else you need to understand. Your soulmate may have noticed that your style has changed. Perhaps you've become more confident. Perhaps you've started expressing yourself differently. Perhaps you've stopped dressing for other people's approval. Maybe you've entered a season where you are finally becoming comfortable with who you are. And they noticed. That change may have affected them more than you realize. Because when someone watches you grow from a distance, something unexpected can happen. They begin realizing that the version of you they once knew is not the same person standing before them now. And that can create admiration. It can create curiosity. And sometimes, it can create regret. Your soulmate may have quietly wondered whether they understood your value too late. Whether they underestimated you. Whether they overlooked something beautiful because they were too distracted by everything happening around them. And now, they are seeing you differently. Not because you suddenly became worthy. You were always worthy. They simply began seeing what was already there. That distinction matters. Because you were never supposed to transform yourself just to make someone choose you. You were never meant to chase approval. You were never meant to compete with another person. Your growth was always supposed to be about becoming more fully yourself. And ironically, that may be exactly what made your soulmate notice you again. They saw a person who no longer seemed desperate to be understood. A person who carried themselves differently. A person who looked peaceful in their own identity. And that kind of confidence can speak louder than any conversation. But then something happened that made the conversation even more revealing. Someone asked your soulmate a very direct question. They asked, "Would you tell them what you really think?" And suddenly, the confidence disappeared. There was hesitation. Because complimenting your style was easy. Admitting what your style represented was much harder. Your soulmate had to confront something they had been avoiding. They didn't simply like the way you looked. They liked the person they believed you were becoming. And that realization brought another thought to the surface. What if they don't see me the same way anymore? That question may have been the real reason behind their silence. Not because they stopped caring. But because they became uncertain. What if you had moved on? What if you no longer waited for them? What if the person who once hoped for their attention had finally learned how to live without it? That possibility can frighten someone who has taken your presence for granted. And perhaps that is why their next move was not as confident as you might expect. They didn't immediately confess everything. They didn't suddenly make a dramatic declaration. Instead, they started observing. They watched for signs. They wondered whether you still noticed them. Whether you still reacted when they entered the room. Whether you still remembered the little things. And here is the part that may surprise you. Your soulmate was not only looking at your style. They were looking for evidence of your heart. They wanted to know whether there was still a place for them in your world. But something happened next that they didn't expect. Someone close to them gave them advice. Simple advice. But powerful enough to change their perspective. They told your soulmate that if they truly admired you, they shouldn't only compliment your appearance. They needed to acknowledge the person behind it. Your strength. Your individuality. Your transformation. Your ability to remain yourself even when nobody was watching. And that advice stayed with them. Because suddenly they realized something. Maybe the reason your style affected them so deeply wasn't because of the clothes. It was because your style had become a symbol of your independence. You were becoming someone who didn't need to be chosen to feel valuable. And that was exactly what made you unforgettable. Your soulmate may have admired many people before. They may have found many people attractive. But there was something different about you. You didn't simply catch their attention. You stayed in their thoughts. And there is a difference. A face can be noticed in a moment. But a presence can remain long after the person has left. And your presence remained. Yet there is still one thing your soulmate has not told you. The most personal part of what they said was not about your clothing. It wasn't about your appearance. It wasn't even about your confidence. It was about one moment when they saw you. And suddenly realized they were afraid of losing the opportunity to know you more deeply. They haven't told you what happened in that moment. They haven't explained why it affected them so much. And they may still be trying to understand it themselves. But the truth is getting closer now. Because the next part of their conversation reveals what they really want you to know. And once you hear the exact meaning behind their words, you may finally understand why they have been acting differently around you.